Hi guys, this is part 3 of the story of the O'Brien family. This one will deal with the O'Briens of the early Middle Ages and talk about the various battles that they would have to overcome to try and equal the achievements of their great father, the man from whom they would take their surname, Brian Boru. So stay tuned for that. So, my name's Ruadh Butler. I write novels about the 12th century and the Norman invasion of Ireland, and these are my 3 books. SWORDLAND deals with the events of 1169 and the first invasion of Ireland. LordSeaCastle about the famous siege of Baginbun, where Ireland was lost and won, and the Earl Strongbow about the siege of Viking Waterford in the summer of 1170. They're really good, and they're available at all good bookshops. And if you'd like to check out the description below, you'll find a connection to them. Cheers. So Brian Boru had a number of sons, quite a number of sons, by 4 different wives, but the 2 we're going to concentrate on are Tig, who was the son of his 3rd wife, and Donogh, who was the son of his 4th wife, the famous/infamous Gormla, the sister of the Maelmorda of Leinster. Here we can see the Kassian family tree. At the very top we have Kennedy MacLorcan, the father of the Kassians, the later Kassians. One of his sons, an elder son, was Doncuan MacKennedy, who his sons went on to become the kings of Ormond, that is East Munster, modern Tipperary, I suppose. Then his second son, whose name I am not going to try to pronounce, whose descendants became Ahern's, a really powerful family in Munster themselves. The 3rd son of Kennedy MacLorcan was Mahon MacLorcan, who you've already heard about him. He was king of Leinster, dying in 976. And beside him, the youngest son, or believed to be the youngest son of the family, is the famous Brian Boru, who was, without equal in Irish history, really one of the most powerful kings that we've ever had. And as you can see there, he died in 1014 at the Battle of Clontarf with, as we go down a generation, his eldest son Murcha, who is his tiniest, and his grandson Turlough O'Brien, who also died at the Battle of Clontarf. And as I said, we will concentrate on the descendants of 2 other sons, Tig MacBrien and Donogh MacBrien, who followed in their famous father's footsteps. So after the Battle of Clontarf, the Kassian army had lost an incredible number of warriors. They had lost 3 generations of the ruling clan, Brian, his son Murcha, and his grandson Turlough. And so we have Tig and Donogh returning presumably to Kassian Heartland in County Clare to try and rebuild what their father had won. Now, they couldn't even, these 2 half-brothers, Tig and Donogh, couldn't really even count on the retention of their own throne within the Kassian tribe, never mind the Munster or the High Kingship. And so, in the years following, the decade following the Battle of Clontarf, we find Tig and Donogh competing with each other over the headship of the family. In 1023, we actually have being Tig. Tig was assassinated by Donogh's followers, leading Donogh as the principal leader of the O'Briens. And
2 years later, within the next 2 years, in 1025, we see Donogh being recognised as King of Munster. He had reclaimed the traditional seat at Cashel from the Oanachta and had become King of Munster, and that was a position he would hold for the next 30 years. However, the Gaelic system allowed for any great-grandson of a king to vie for the kingship, and Tig had left his own son Turlough when he had died in 1023, and Turlough, of course, wasn't willing to sit around and wait for somebody else to hand him the kingship. He would try and take it like any good O'Brien should.
Here we see the branch of the family that Turlough O'Brien belonged to, followed by, in purple, the branch of the family that Donogh, who was then King of Munster, belonged to during the battle between the two branches of the O'Brien family.
Turlough made an alliance with the enemies of Donogh, the Kings of Munster and Connaught, Kings of Leinster and Connaught, and in the 1050s he sort of started in this battle, this kind of war of attrition to take the High Kingship from Donogh, and he drove Donogh from Limerick, the old Viking city, in 1058, and finally forced him into exile, his uncle into exile, in 1063. The throne of Munster was briefly held by Donogh's son, Murcha, but with the help of the new High King of Ireland, this High King with opposition, Dermot MacNelbo of the O'Kinsella dynasty. Turlough O'Brien was finally recognised as King of Munster in 1068. So, following his rise to the kingship of Munster in 1068, Turlough O'Brien continued his alliance with Dermot MacMellenbo, the King of Leinster, who was the claimant to the High Kingship of the day. And that alliance lasted until 1072, when Dermot died, and in the same way that Brian Boru's death had caused turmoil in the O'Brien family, Dermot's death caused his sons and grandsons to vie for the kingship of the O'Kinsella and Leinster. And this allowed Turlough to rise to become one of the most powerful kings in Ireland, and he used this kind of death to claim the kingship of Dublin. He was in control of Dublin in 1072, and he was able to then force his overlordship of several major families in Connaught and Leinster. And really, his masterstroke was placing his own sons, Murchata and Dermot, in direct control of these real economic centres in Dublin, where Murchata became King of Dublin and Dermot became King of Munster in and around 1075. And this control of Connaught, Munster, Leinster, and these two big power centres of Dublin and Waterford allowed Turlough O'Brien to keep up the family tradition, and he was able to claim to be High King of Ireland. Now, he wasn't king over, he didn't have the overlordship of Meath or Ulster. The O'Neill families were still preeminent there, but he claimed it, and for the next few years he was able to claim to be the High King of Ireland, something of which his grandfather Brian Boru would have been extremely proud, I would say. Turlough's main tactic in maintaining his rule over the lands over which he was overlord was to, I suppose, the age-old attempt to divide and conquer, and he did this by promoting families that of a lesser standing to help them compete with the families of a greater standing. So in Connaught, he threw his support behind the O'Rourke's of Breffni, so that they could compete for the kingship of that province with the ruling house of the O'Connors, and it would really take the O'Connors a few generations to stabilise after that, and but it was a rule that they would not forget. It was one that they would remember, that had been done to them by an O'Brien when their time came, when their climb to greatness came about. So Turlough O'Brien, that would-be High King of Ireland, died of an illness in 1086. His eldest son, Tig, died just a little while after him, and this left his two sons, who he had placed in command of Dublin and Waterford, as the two contenders for the kingship of Munster and the overlordship of the Dalcassians, the O'Briens as they would now be called.
So here we see the family tree of the High Kings of Ireland with Brian Boru at the very top, his two surviving sons, Tig MacBrien and Donnacha MacBrien, who had vied for the kingship of Munster and the rule over the O'Brien family, as they should now be known. Obviously, Donnacha won and Tig lost, but in the long run, it really was Tig's descendants who would control the kingship. As you see, his son Turlough O'Brien was claimant to the High King of Ireland, as we just talked about, and he, if we go down to the fourth generation, you can see that his descendants include Murtagh O'Brien, who's King of Dublin and Munster, Tig O'Brien, who was briefly King of Munster, and Dermot O'Brien, who was also briefly King of Munster and actually quite a long time as King of Waterford.
Murtagh, King O'Brien, King of Dublin, would emerge as the victor over Dermot O'Brien, King of Waterford, and he would become King of Munster. And Murtagh would quickly extend his rule over Leinster, Meath and Dublin, and was able to, in those terms, claim to be the King or the High King of Ireland, like his father had been. But he vied with this with the ever-increasing power of the MacLaughlins of the Northern O'Neill, the MacLaughlins of Ulster, and he even, this Murtagh, formed an alliance with the King of Norway, Magnus Berlegs, and they campaigned in Ulster in 1102. Despite having won the throne of Munster, Murtagh still had issues with his younger brother, or his brother, Dermot. And in 1114, Dermot was able to defeat Murtagh and claim the kingship of Munster. Murtagh was able to re-establish control the following year, but these wars between the two brothers obviously weakened the hold of Munster over the High Kingship and allowed the O'Connors of Connaught under their new king, King Turlough O'Connor, to first cast off the overlordship of the O'Briens, and then to make his own run for power as High King around 1118. And in fact, in 1118, Turlough O'Connor invaded Munster, and he decided, remembering what had happened to his own family in the days of Turlough O'Brien back in the 1080s and 60s, he decided that he was going to divide Munster between the two vying dynasties of the age of the kingdom. Even in the time of Brian Boru, the two major families were the O'Briens to the north in modern County Clare, and the Oanachta to the south in what is now County Cork. By the 1118, the major family of the Oanachta were the McCarthys, and the McCarthys were promoted to the Kings of Desmond, so no longer Kings of Munster, they were Kings of Desmond, South Munster, and the O'Briens were relegated from Kings of Munster to merely the Kings of North Munster, Thomond, as we now know it, which is roughly equates to modern County Clare and North Tipperary. So despite having been relegated to merely King of Thomond by Turlough O'Connor, the new man claiming to be High King, these wars between Murtagh and his brother Dermot continued. In 1119, the year after the division of Munster, Murtagh died, and Dermot's son Conor, his eldest son Conor, took the kingship. He also had his own issues with his younger brothers Tig and Turlough, but he managed to hold on to power until 1142, at which time Tig and Turlough continued their fight. Turlough turned out to be the winner, and he reigned alone from 1142 to 1154 when Tig died.
So all these Teigs and Turlough and are probably becoming a little bit confusing, but you can see here Turlough O'Brien, the grandson of Brian Boru, at the top of this family tree. And if we go then to on the left, we see that Moore O'Brien married into the family of O'Connor first and foremost, and her son Turlough O'Connor was the man who divided Munster into Thomond and Desmond in 1118. If we then go along the way, we've got Murchita O'Brien, who was claiming to be High King as well. His son, unfortunately, didn't attain the kingship of Munster or Thomond. His brother Taig we have here, and then we have Dermot, who again was a claimant and who vied for the kingship of Munster with his brothers, Murchita in particular. Then we go down that next generation, we see there Conor O'Brien, who was king until 1142 when he died. He is most famous probably for Clare Castle down in the south of Tipperary. Wonderful castle. If you have the chance, if you're in the area, please go and visit it. It's gorgeous. Then his brother, Taig, another Taig, and another Turlough, who again vied for the kingship of Thomond after its division back in 1118.
By the 1150s, we are seeing kind of an incessant war throughout Ireland. We've got a kind of two power bases arising. In the north, we have the McLaughlins of the Northern O'Neill reasserting their power. We've got the O'Connors in Connaught vying for the High Kingship. And Leinster had sort of joined forces with Ulster. Meath was in a mess. Connaught was at the height of its power. And Munster was still kind of lagging behind somewhat. In 1157 we have Murtagh MacLachlan of the Northern O'Neill coming south to try and enforce his claim to the High Kingship by beating the crap out of the O'Briens and Munster. And he basically displaced poor old Turlough O'Brien and put his nephew, or a distant cousin, anyway, Conor O'Brien, another Conor O'Brien, on the throne, and he remained there until Turlough was returned to the throne in 1165 by Rory O'Connor, the King of Connaught, who was well on the way to becoming the principal king in Ireland in those days. So by 1165, events are starting to come to a head, both in Ireland, both across Ireland and in Munster, and in an international manner as well. Turlough O'Brien had been returned to the throne of Thomond by Rory O'Connor, but then he was actually deposed from power by his own son, Murchita O'Brien, who only held that power for 3 years when he was killed at the behest of Conor O'Brien, who had come to the throne as a kind of usurper in 1157. In any event, the death of Murchita O'Brien in 1168 at the hands of his cousin Conor led to Murchita's younger brother Donal becoming king of Thomond in that year, 1168. Now, Donal couldn't have known it, but he was about to enter the high politics of Ireland at a very, very tumultuous time. And in my opinion, he would prove the very equal of his great forebear, Brian Boru, in his efforts to maintain the power of the O'Briens and the power of Thomond over the coming years. So I hope you tune in to part 4 of the story of the O'Brien family as we look at the career of Donal Mór O'Brien, who became King of Thomond and head of the O'Brien family during the years of the Norman invasion of Ireland. Which gives me an easy segue into talking about my novels and a bit of a plug for them. These are the Invader series by Ruadh Butler, available in all good bookshops. If you look down in the description, you'll find a link to them. SWORDLAND deals with the invasion of Ireland in 1169 by Robert Fitzstephen. LordSeaCastle about the siege of Baginbun, where Ireland was lost and won. And the last one in the series so far is the Earl Strongbow, which deals with the Norman conquest of Viking Waterford in 1170. So do take a look at those, please. Cheers.